Guys, welcome back to Zane Customs. So this is what we're going to be working on today. For those of you who watch my channel and have seen some of my old videos, you'll know, or you'll recognize this sculpt. Just something I did for fun, kind of a aquatic alien dude, and I just really liked the way it turned out, so I thought it'd be cool to go ahead and print one up and paint it. But there's a few things I wanted to mention before we get into that. This is not like the standard size. Like I sell all these sculpts on Etsy, and if you were to go to buy this off Etsy, this wouldn't be the size. This is, I don't know, maybe 4 inches tall. I usually do them twice this size. So since I did it so small, there's a few issues I had with it. For one, you can see the back here on his legs, super bumpy, and that is just because there was so much support material on there that even breaking the support material off, it kind of left this mess back here, which I was actually fine with, because again, this isn't for a commission or anything. Nobody bought this from me. I was just doing this for fun, just because I really like the sculpt. So I'm fine with that. I don't really care. And also, he already has all these bumps all over his body, and it just kind of fit in. It's a little bit more excessive down here than it is on his back or his chest, obviously, but it wasn't that big of a deal. And you know, resin's expensive. I didn't want to reprint it anyway. Second, I wanted to go over is I was just gonna prime this guy up and then get right into painting, but there's actually something pretty cool I saw. So this is right here is the base, and this got warped a little bit in printing, so I got to sand the bottom to get it flush. And then yeah, one of the corners kind of got messed up, but again, I'm not really too worried about it. I'll probably just cut it into a little bit of an oval shape and sand the bottom. Part of the reason I like to do these small prints is just so if I do ever have to print a big one, I know kind of what I'm going up against, and helps me decide how I want the supports and things like that. But anyways, I just wanted to show this off because this material, this kind of translucent yellow, is what this used to be, and then I decided to go ahead and do a white primer over it. And the reason I wanted to show this off, and you can tell I didn't do a great job, I just did a light priming coat over it, and that's because I just did one coat and then I was gonna let that dry and come back and do a second coat. The reason I left it like this is because I thought it looked really cool. It looked like ivory, which is like a elephant bone. So I don't know, I just thought that was cool. This kind of translucent yellow with a little bit of white on top really helped sell that look, which wasn't really what I was going for, but gives me a lot of ideas for some cool sculpts in the future if I ever need to do some natural looking ivory. And then lastly, here is the girl. So if you guys remember the sculpt, the alien's kind of standing here, and he's got this girl made out of water just kind of resting in his hand. Oh, a little bit like that. Yeah, and she's just made out of water and got this dress that's also made out of water kind of flown out of his hands. So this one filled as well. You could see, if I get it to focus here, you only have the dress bottom, and then in the sculpt there's a little bit like a shirt that kind of ended and then went into the skirt, and that ends right there, but the whole top half with the head and everything, that broke off. So this is a piece that unfortunately I will have to reprint. Again, this whole thing is a smaller scale than I would normally do for an actual like production print, so it's a lot harder, because this would normally be, you know, twice the size and be a lot easier. But with some of these small prints, they're really hard to, especially when they're covered with a lot of different supports, it's hard to keep them from breaking. But yeah, that's something I'm gonna go ahead and reprint, and I might reprint this, but like I said, I was just thinking about cutting it into an oval shape and sanding the bottom flat, and then it should be fine. I'll show you later once I get to that stage how I'm going to turn these into a translucent blue so they actually look like water. And then, you know, for those of you who remember the actual sculpt, this is just a base. He's kind of standing on top of the water with these ripples going out. So it'll be a pretty cool sculpt, I think. Or I'm definitely excited to paint it up. So here we go with the start of the painting process. Basically what I'm trying to do is just rough out the colors across his skin. I'm not really worried about his carapace or the feathers or fins or whatever you want to call them hanging off the back of his head and his arms, or even the tentacles coming out. I'm just focusing on his greenish skin, and it kind of transitions down to a blue and then a purple at his feet. And I have my iPad set up in the back with some photos from my actual ZBrush model, so I can just kind of mimic the paint going on there. And what I'm really trying to do here is just match colors, and again just get a basic layer down and get that good transition from green to purple. And Don't start off, I have some model paints from the brand called Army Painter. They're really nice. I like to thin them down a little bit so that I don't want to see the brush strokes, and I don't want to cover over any of the existing texture that's in the model. Because I sculpted that in for a reason, and if the paint was too thick, it would just kind of cover over that. So if you do a thin coat, you might have to do a couple of coats, but it worked out pretty well here. Just doing one thin coat and kind of transition in between these colors, especially because I'll go in later and add some dark highlight or dark shadows and stuff, so you don't really see any white through the color. And then I'm going to go ahead and take some oranges in here. Just want a little bit of orange color at the tip of his fins, kind of going down the side of his abs into his legs, and also a little bit of orange going on from his neck down to the tops of his arms. And this is what I kind of imagined, like a little bit of an under skin that would go underneath his carapace that would be a little bit more, maybe more sensitive, but it's got a different texture and everything going on. So in the end, there's actually a lot of different shades of orange going on in between, in between the carapace itself, and then the tips of his fins, and a little bit even on his fins later on. And this right here, this is what's called strong tone, and it's basically just a super thin down dark paint that you can paint over your whole model and then let it sit for a minute and then wipe the rest off, and the dark really stays in the cracks to really help highlight the shadows. Alright guys, so this is where we're at this point. And like I mentioned, I just basically roughed out the colors on his skin just based off what I did in ZBrush. And then I did a little bit more with the orange. So I kind of think of it as all this green that transitions into the blue and purple, even with these fins. That's all just his skin. And then this would be right here, this orange. I kind of think of more of like it would be more of a sensitive part of his body, kind of hidden underneath the shell, and you just see it from time to time as he flexes around. But basically I just rough those colors in and try to have a good transition from the green down to the purple. And then what you just saw me do is I used what's called a strong tone, which is a super thin paint. You use it as a wash, and it's thin so that it could run into all these little cracks and crevices, especially in between on the orange here, and it just gives a little bit more depth and makes it pop. And then what I'm going to do next, once this is completely dry, I'll go in and do what's called dry brushing. And dry brushing, you just, like, say I'm going to dry brush on his chest right here. I'll get this green, the same color, get it a little bit lighter, and then go in with my brush and put a little bit on the paintbrush, and then I'll basically just wipe it all off onto a towel until it's pretty much all the way off, and then I'll go ahead and brush over the top of this. And it's called dry brushing because you want the paint on your brush to be pretty much completely dry, so just a tiny amount comes off it. But what that'll do is, because it's so dry, it'll just hit the high points. So like all these bumps, especially back here, you'll be able to see it really well, but on his back and even on this orange right here, I'll do a little bit of dry brushing on there, and it'll just make it pop even more. It'll just give it a nice highlight right on the top. Yeah, so this is the dry brush process. Again, you just gotta have super dry paint on the brush, hardly anything on there, and just lightly brushing over the top. Really helps hit those highlights on the top of the model. And something I didn't mention earlier, but roughing out all the colors on the body, it's really nice if you leave the paint kind of wet as you transition, because you have a nice blend between colors. Alright, I don't know how well this is coming across on video, but I just did that dry brushing. Now it just basically really makes things pop. You can see some of these wrinkles that I sculpted in between the knees and the shins are really starting to pop, and this little wrinkle going over what's basically like a hoof on the bottom. And then yeah, his ribs and everything on his chest just really start to pop a lot more, especially again this little orange, almost tentacle looking thing going on. Really makes that pop, especially on here. It was a little bit messy because it got the green blending into the orange, and doing that strong tone to really make some darks, and then a little bit of dry brushing really just helps it all blend together a lot better. Alright, and then with the skin pretty much done, I went ahead and did a matte clear coat on that, and then I'm going to go ahead and start working on the carapace. And like I mentioned, it's a lot of different shades of orange going on here. I wanted this one to be a lot more vibrant, a lot more of a strong orange going on, and then eventually I'm going to add in some different shades and different highlights and some blues. And for anybody that's curious, I kind of painted it in this order because I thought it'd be easier to do the skin, and if there's any overlap on the carapace, it doesn't matter, because now I'm doing the carapace, and if I get any overlap on the fins or the tentacles, I'm painting those last. So I don't know if this was the best way to do it, but it worked out pretty well for me. And right now I'm just trying to get a nice base coat of that orange, and then you'll see I'm starting to add in some different blues. Kind of, I wanted it to go from blue, kind of transition into a little bit of a red into the orange. And again, I'm just doing this because I have some photos of my actual ZBrush model set up on my iPad, and I'm just kind of trying to mimic those. I did end up going with a little bit of a lighter blue on this one than the actual model, but I'm just trying to mimic that and get a similar outcome. And again, I'm trying to do all this with just paint brushes, trying to work on my blending and everything. And like I mentioned earlier, if you leave the paint wet, it kind of blends a little bit better, but I think that's something that would look a lot better with the airbrush, at least until I get better at blending. And then now I'm here just going over with a little bit of a dry brush to get some of the highlights of the orange, and then a little bit of red highlights, because there's a little bit of texture on top of the carapace that I wanted to be red, and also use the red dry brush to kind of transition between the blue and the orange a little bit better. And then lastly, for the carapace, I'm going in here with a gloss coat. So the rest of the model will be matte, so it won't be too shiny, but the carapace I want it to be more reflective, so I'm using the gloss coat on that. Alright guys, so while the paint on this dries, or the gloss coat on that, we're going to work on this. So I went ahead and sanded the back flush, or flat I mean, and then rounded the edges. So we just want it, so we want to paint it blue, but so this resin actually is crystal clear when you start off, and then after you print with it, you gotta cure it. It's UV resin, so it cures in the sun, and the longer you leave it in the sun, the more yellow it gets. And I wasn't really too worried about this one because I knew I was going to paint it a deep blue afterwards. But if you're worried and you want a light blue, and you're worried about the yellow maybe turning it green, then you only want to leave it in the sun for a little bit, or under your UV light or whatever you're doing. But with this one, I wanted to go a really dark blue, or even a little tinge of green in there is fine. But it's really hard with clear UV resins, printable ones, because they all yellow pretty quick, so you gotta be careful with them. But let me show you how we're gonna paint it blue. What I do is I went out and bought this classic tie-dye kit just from Walmart. Actually, this was my wife's, and then I just started messing with it, and it works pretty well for this. I do this with a lot of different things. I have on my Etsy store, I have some flower lamps. I haven't done a video on them yet, but it's something I want to do in the future. But they're just basically lamps with little clear pieces of 3D printed petals that go all around the lamp, so it looks like a flower that's glowing. They're pretty cool, and I paint all those with these. With the lamps, I use like pinks or purples and greens for the leaves and stuff, but it's the same thing. This is just tie-dye kit. You can just spray this on your shirt and dyes it pretty good, but they're really thin, which is what I want because I want it to be a translucent paint. You know, obviously if I just went over with this and watered it down, you could get close to the right effect, but not really what I'm going for. I want it to be clearly transparent, and what I'll usually do is I'll just pop this cap and spray a little bit of this into my airbrush and spray it on so I get it nice and even. But I'm trying to do this whole thing without really using the airbrush, just as a challenge. So we're just going to try and paint it on there, and I've never done that, so we'll see. I might end up having to go back to the airbrush, but we're going to try painting it. And these are both two different shades of blue, and I think I'm going to go with the darker one. You can see a lot of dye comes out pretty quickly, and I don't want it pulling up too much. I want it to be pretty nice and consistent. Unlike the paint job that I did on the alien guy, I don't really want dark spots and high spots, at least not at this point. So I just want to make sure I get a nice even coat, and I can always do more coats later. This stuff, if you do it in the airbrush and you spray it on really thin, it dries pretty quick. But just like the paint, you know, if you get water on it, it'll kind of wipe off, especially if you have a really smooth surface. So you got to be careful of that. But what I'll do once I'm done with this is I have a UV resistant clear coat, which is just in a rattle can, and I like to use the UV resistant on anything clear just because, like I mentioned, these are UV cured resins, so I don't want to risk having it yellow even more. And you know, if I had this in the sun and didn't realize it, come back and have them standing on, you know, green water, which, you know, might fit this alien character, but I'm really going for this deep ocean blue right now. So the UV resistant clear coat will just help keep the sun from yellowing it any more than it already has. But you can already tell with that's just one layer of dye on here. It already looks pretty dang good. I might go a little bit darker, but I'm actually really happy with that already. And I mean, it's kind of hard to see. I don't have the greatest camera here, but kind of see the paintbrush behind it. So it's still definitely transparent. Yeah, you can see really good there, which is what I was going for. And this is a nice deep blue color. And then I got the girl in his hand here, and I'll just paint this up just to see what it looks like. I still need to print a new one, but just to see what this looks like, I'll give it a quick paint job. And you saw I sprayed a lot of dye on there, but you really don't need that much. You saw I wiped most of it off in the end. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Let's bring our guy over here just to see kind of what it looks like. And like I mentioned, the dye dries really quick. Let's get a nice white base on here so it's easier to see. So I have to glue them onto the base, but I think that's going to look pretty cool. And yeah, I'm going to end up definitely needing to do a couple more gloss coats over his carapace before I move on to his little leaf wing things and his tentacles. Alright, and then I think in the end I ended up doing 3 or 4 coats of that gloss to get it to a nice shine that I wanted it to be at. And now I can just move on to the tentacles and his little fin leaf things here. So these were quite a bit more difficult than I thought they'd be, just because they're in such weird positions, and I didn't want to get any of this purple paint on his carapace or his skin. And one thing that's nice about doing the gloss coat and the matte clear coats over the top is it makes it easier to wipe off any excess paint. But still, I was really trying not to get anything over where it's not supposed to be. And that's one thing that's a lot easier when it comes to my bigger models. Again, if I was actually selling this like through Etsy, it would be twice the size, or maybe even a little bit bigger than that. So I'd have them come apart in multiple pieces. So like all these feathers or fins, I'd be able to paint individually and then glue them in at the end. And same with this tentacle. So it'd just be a lot easier to paint. But the fins here, they're pretty much the same process as everything else. I just base coated them with that nice purple, and then I'm going over and using a little bit of a pinkish red to dry brush the tips of the fins, and then I'm using an orange to dry brush from the carapace into the fins to have a nice transition there. And then here with this black, I'm just trying to paint in his eyes, which was a little bit more difficult than I thought it'd be. I ended up having to pull out some of my really small precision paintbrushes. And then that's pretty much done. Now I just gotta attach it all. You see I got a new print of the girl, but this one didn't print perfectly either, but it's so small you don't really notice it unless you're up close. And then I'm just using some super glue to attach the girl and attach the alien to the base. Alright guys, here we are. Here's the finished piece. Unfortunately, like I mentioned before, I don't really have the best setup for recording, painting such small pieces, or the best lens or anything like that. So hopefully in the future I'll get some better equipment if I'm going to keep doing this. Which I want to. I had a ton of fun painting this guy. And there's some future sculpts I'm working on that I already know would be fun to paint up. Yeah, he's pretty good overall. There's a few issues that if this was an actual production piece that I was going to be selling on my Etsy that I would change. You know, I'd have to go in between his carapace and his skin and just clean up some of those lines. And on the back here, I didn't let the clear coat dry long enough, so when I did an extra wash on the back, it just kind of wiped some of the paint right off. So that's something I'd have to fix. And there's still a lot of support material lines. You can see right here, right in the back of his knee, there's a big long piece of support material, and there's a line right here from some sort of mishap with the printing. A lot of stuff that's I could have fixed easily. This doesn't necessarily mean it's a failed print. I could have just sanded that out or filled that in with a little bit of fillers. Not a big deal. But when you paint it up and you're far enough away, you can't even tell any of those details. It's definitely something I would be excited to go back to if I did sell one on Etsy, because like I mentioned, if my Etsy statues are twice this size on average, so you'd actually be able to see a lot more detail and be able to see the girl in a lot more detail, because right now you can't really tell much. It's just so tiny. But yeah, overall I'm actually really happy with it. And then here's just a few better photos, just because again I don't have the best setup for recording them. I thought I'd get some better quality photos at the end so you guys can really see all the detail. You can see how well that dry brushing really brings out a lot of the fine details in the skin and on the carapace and everything. And lastly, I just wanted to say thanks to anybody who's watched this video all the way through, or anyone that's willing to like, comment, subscribe, anything like that. Helps me out a ton, and I just super appreciate it. And also, if you want to check out my Etsy or my Instagram or anything like that, you can check it out in the description below. And thanks for watching.